I'm not the only one who's been losing sleep, I guess. You guys, let me pray. Father in heaven, again, we're thankful for your word. I pray that your word would speak to us in this coming hour. I pray that you would help us to be wise, help us to be godly, help me to speak the truth with love. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So I'm going to spend a lot of this session dealing with one of the courtships in the Bible, in the book of Ruth. And I assume most of you are familiar with the book of Ruth in the Bible. I'll give you a little bit of background. Well, let's say, who is the main character in the book of Ruth? I can't argue against that. Where is it? Huh? If you all had just kept laughing at me, I thought I was saying something funny. So the main human character in the book of Ruth, I believe, is Naomi. And in Ruth chapter 1, Naomi and her husband and then their sons are in Moab. There was a famine in Bethlehem where they lived. They go to Moab, which another country, my opinion is, bad move. When Naomi gets to Moab, her husband Elimelech dies. Her sons marry Moabite women, but then her sons die. And finally the famine is over and they return to Bethlehem. And there is Naomi, the Israelite lady, but now she's got her daughter-in-law, Orpah, for whom Oprah, I think, was named, goes back to Moab. One daughter-in-law, Ruth, the one we've heard of, she's the one that says, where you go, I will go. You know, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Ruth is converted. And then the story of the book of Ruth is one of redemption. Naomi is a woman who needs redemption. She says when she comes to Bethlehem, I went out full, but now I've come back empty. I had a husband and 2 sons. And what the sons would mean, especially in Israel, is that you need sons in order for the name of your family to continue. You need sons in order to possess the land. Your family has land, your plot of ground in Israel that your name will be carried on. But if you have no sons, that land will go to some other relative and you're forgotten. So Naomi is a desperate woman. She has no man to provide for her. And the book of Ruth is about God making provision. And the bigger picture is redemption. And that's what, right, the God is the hero of Ruth, not Boaz. But God has made provision for widows. And in chapter 2, there's going to be provision of food, which was in the law, that widows could glean and be fed. And then chapter 3, which we're going to cover now, there was provision of marriage so that the family name could be continued. And I believe, where Ruth fits in, Ruth was in the days of who? The days of the judges. Were those the good old days? Can't we just wish we could go back to the days of the judges? No, those were the bad old days. Ruth is like a bright light in a dark time, the book of Ruth. But also, I think what's going on is the condition of Naomi is the condition of Israel. That Israel is barren. She's beaten up by her neighbors. She's oppressed. She can't even sharpen her tools. You get into the book of Judges, and there's chaos and immorality and evil and all these horrible things going on. Israel needs redemption. And so, in one sense, Naomi needs redemption, which is going to come through Boaz marrying Ruth and them having a baby. And you probably, but then Israel needs redemption. What's the last word in the book of Ruth? In my translation, the last word of the book of Ruth is David. That Ruth and Boaz have a child. He has Jesse, Obed, Jesse, and then David. And so God is bringing redemption not just to Naomi. God is bringing redemption to his people through this obscure family that seemed like they would never have kids. Now the Redeemer is going to come and make Israel great. Not even again, but for the first time. So I want you to see, that's what it's all about. And I'm going to, on chapter 3, is the famous story where Naomi sends Ruth to essentially propose to Boaz. And you could look at this and say, this is really strange. What happens? And it's not a dating seminar of how to uncover the feet of your future husband. You could look at Naomi, and she seems like one of those pushy mothers in the Jane Austen stories trying to get her daughter married off. I would also say that one thing about reading narrative is that narratives in the Bible often describe what people do without actually telling you whether it was good or bad. You have to use the law and the epistles to evaluate people's behaviors. And quite frankly, my summary would be, I think Naomi had a good idea and a bad execution. I'll get to that in a moment. So the book of Ruth, I'm making the point, I understand, I think it's important for you to understand, the book of Ruth is primarily about redemption, not romance. But I think sometimes, and one of our professors at my seminary has a really good point, is that the meaning of a text, there's the center of the meaning, which is the most important thing, which is redemption, but there are also things taught or illustrated in the text that may not be the main point, but have relevance. And since I'm supposed to be talking about, dating, courtship, etc., believe it or not, I think there's some principles here which are important and can be useful to you. And I'm going to retell the story as succinctly as I can to get to those principles, which are going to illustrate some of the things we're talking about. So I'm going to walk through the chapter. Again, I assume most of you know the story that in chapter 2, Ruth had gone out to glean, which means to go behind those reaping in the harvest, and widows could catch what they dropped. They could go to the corners which weren't supposed to be reaped. It was a way for widows to be provided for. I guess in the economic lecture, right, with Mr. McLeod, would be, there was a means, God's welfare system wasn't you handed people bread, but you gave them a way to gather grain, poor people, widows, under that. And so Ruth goes out, and again, these are the days of the judges. Would you want to be a woman going out among the gleaners in the days of the judges? If you've read the book of Judges, you say, no, I wouldn't want to be that. But God provides Boaz, who keeps her safe and is very generous to let her reap. And there's actually a lovely expression where Boaz commends her in verse 12. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. And it's a lovely picture where Ruth has turned away from her gods, her people, to become part of the people of God and gaining refuge, like a bird protecting its chicks. It's an expression used several times in Scripture. She's come to seek refuge in God. Boaz likes that. He likes the fact that Ruth is, as a daughter-in-law, fulfilling the duty of caring for her mother-in-law, who I guess is too old to go out and reap. I'm not sure why Naomi wasn't helping, but that's what it is. And so when you get to chapter 3, as the law of God had provided two fundamental things for widows. One is provision, that's chapter 2. The second one is the possibility of remarriage, especially for the purpose of carrying on the family line. And so as you get to chapter 1, this explains what Naomi's doing. So because we're not under the old covenant, this is not an example of what you should do, whatever, mom, to send your daughter off to do something crazy like this. Again, I'm going to find principles I think are still true to the Scriptures. So, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, chapter 3, verse 1, My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now was not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies. You shall go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do. And Ruth said to her, All you say, I will do. So again, Naomi is taking initiative to find a husband for Ruth, but there's an important context, probably some of you are familiar with it, in Deuteronomy 25. In verse 5, there was provision what some have called Levirate marriage. And Levirate marriage was because of the importance of a family line being carried on in the nation. If a man usually the older brother dies and his wife had no children, then a younger brother or other relative should marry her for the purpose of carrying on the name of the dead man. And actually, the first child born to them would not legally be the physical father. It would be the dead guy carrying on that guy's name. Follow? Okay. And this is what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased man should not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as a wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. And so this is, Naomi's aware of this. This is a provision that, and for her, it's, okay, her husband's dead, her sons are dead, how are we going to carry on the family name? Well, Ruth, the wife of one of the dead sons, if she marries a close relative, and it's going to be Boaz, the first child is going to be legally the child of the dead man, and therefore the name of the family will continue, which is a big deal under the Old Covenant for many reasons. And of course, really a big deal here because it's in the Messianic line. So we're not under that now. So if your brother dies, you don't have to marry her widow. Although in our church we had a case where that actually happened. Now, you might ask, why doesn't Boaz take initiative? A couple reasons. One would be that we're going to learn later there's somebody ahead of him in line, which may have prevented him from taking the initiative. It's also interesting that in verse 7 to 10 of Deuteronomy 25, if a man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. And it says that she should come up to him in the sight of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall declare, this is what is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. So there is provision for some initiative on the female side in these situations. So Naomi gives Ruth these instructions. I'm not going to go through them in detail. She's strategic, picking the right time. It's a festival. It's a feast. It's after famine now. The harvest has come in, and we're feasting. We're rejoicing, working hard, bringing the field, and so she's picking your moment, like apples of gold and settings of silver is the word spoken in the right circumstance. She's picking a time when he's going to be merry and happy, as we're going to see. And then Ruth isn't just to show up, but anoint yourself. You need to smell good and look good. Put on your best clothes. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but many people who understand Hebrew, and as you've studied the Old Testament, Naomi's words are full of indirect sexual innuendo. The washing, the perfuming is like a bride preparing for her wedding night. When she says lie down, the word lie down is like used of what Potiphar's wife said, lie with me. Anyway, there's innuendo. It even brings to mind, like Potiphar's wife, it brings to mind Lot with his daughters, like, and you feel like, Naomi, is this really a good idea? I understand what you're trying to do. Matthew Henry, the great commentator, says, this has such an appearance of evil, we do not know how to justify it. I agree with Matthew Henry. It's a risky plan. If Boaz is not a good man, Ruth could be harmed or taken advantage of. Her reputation could be ruined. So my take, and others may disagree with me, is Naomi is seeking a good outcome that even has a basis in the law. This is not the way she had to do it. Sounds risky to me. She didn't ask. Ruth agrees. And it's interesting. It echoes the language of Mary, I am the bond slave of the Lord. May it be done to me according to your word. All you say I will do. So then, continuing in verse 6, the encounter. Then she, that is Ruth, went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It had happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward. And behold, a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." Now, again, Boaz's heart is merry. This is even a point. There's a time for celebration, like you guys doing your dancing while I'm sleeping at night or whatever. This is a celebratory time for many of you. She sneaks in. The language in Boaz is like he quaked. This is shocking. But the language she uses is brilliant. She's a smart girl. When she uses the language of spread your covering over your maid, it really echoes the verse in verse 12 where he says, the Lord has spread his wings under which you're taking refuge. She's saying, you prayed that God would give me refuge under his wings. Well, I'm asking you to answer your own prayer. That refuge would come through you becoming my kinsman redeemer, that I could have a husband and the family line could continue. And Boaz, verse 10, now he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first, by not going after the young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Now, it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. Then he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And again he said, "Give me the cloak that is on you, and hold it." So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. So under these circumstances, and this is where I think 21st century people read this, and if it was a movie nowadays, they'd sleep together and whatever would happen. He is a gentleman. She's in a very vulnerable position. He acts with poise, integrity. He comforts her, "Fear not." He encourages her that, again, what you're doing is good. He recognizes that she's not just looking for a hot guy to marry. She's marrying out of her loyalty to the Lord and loyalty to her family, to be faithful. And Boaz is essentially saying, you're not marrying for passion. You're marrying to please God. And she's saying, marry me so we can have a child to carry on the name of my family. And Boaz praises her. Everyone knows you are a woman of excellence. This is the same word, I believe, as in Proverbs 31 of the excellent wife. That your reputation is outstanding. And I think he's implying lots of men would like to marry you. I'm so glad you picked me. And at this point, you're thinking, this is really good. But it's like one of these Hallmark movies that I've watched under some level of husbandly compulsion, is that this couple looks like it's all going to work out. Then with about 15 minutes to go, there's a problem. The bad boyfriend from New York shows up or whatever it is. And so he says, okay, I'm going to do it. But, and as you're reading the book, I think these people are made for each other. He's an excellent man. She's an excellent woman. But there's a catch. Just when we're hearing the wedding bells, he says there's a nearer relative. And according to his understanding of the law of God, that this man had a closer relationship to family relationship. And what it's saying about Boaz's character is even though he wants to marry Ruth, God's work must be done in God's way and in God's time. And so he's not going to run ahead of the Lord. He's not going to cut corners. He's going to do what the Bible says. And he's even willing to give up something I think he really wants if that's God's will. But he also ensures to meet her needs. He says, either way, by tomorrow you're going to be married. We just don't know to whom. And in chapter 4, we're not going to go into that. He confronts the guy, and the guy's a loser. loses his shoe, actually, as part of the transaction. And, Ruth gets the girl. So it all works out like it does in the Hallmark movies. But, and then he sends her home full. He's protecting her reputation, that people would not know that she came, might not get the right idea. The measures of barley is, I think, a pledge. He's going to keep his word. It's more provision. And they're both of excellent character. They were in a situation, again, in my opinion, Naomi, probably that wasn't the best way to appeal to Boaz. But even in the days of the judges, I'm sure they were chaste under those circumstances. And then the last few verses, before I start making the application. So, then she went into the city. When she came to her mother-in-law, the literal translation of Naomi is not, how did it go? The literal translation is, who are you? It's what Boaz had said, who are you? Well, Naomi's saying, who are you? I think that probably means, are you now Mrs. Boaz? But obviously what happened? I doubt if anybody slept that night among Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. I'm not even sure what she thought was going to happen. But, wait, my daughter, you do not know how the matter until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest till it's settled today. Naomi knows the character of Boaz, that Boaz will make sure that Ruth is taken care of according to the law. Again, can you imagine knowing you're getting married tomorrow? You just don't know which of two guys it's going to be. Aren't you glad you're in the new covenant? So, how on earth could this possibly apply to you? A totally different culture of marriage. And maybe you've known people from other cultures as well. Like I said, many people in Asia, their parents are very involved in arranging marriages, all kinds of things going on. Now, obviously, their courtship is radically different to idealized romances today. And there's so much about our culture in romance that influences us that we're not even aware of. It's just like in the air we breathe. Our culture makes romantic love the most important thing. Going back to Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet, and they defy their families, and they have a passion so strong they're willing to kill themselves if they don't get that other person. Boaz doesn't say, I must have you. Let's run away together. Who cares about that other guy? His love is a noble, redemptive love. Hollywood love is, I need you so much, I can't live without you. And again, it's putting romantic love higher than love for God. Boaz loves God more than he loves Ruth. And that dictates his behavior. And for you, actually, one way, I'll speak very personally, one way I knew I might be ready to get married is when I was already serious with Caroline, and I realized that as much as I was excited about getting married, if the Lord were to return before I could do that, that would be just fine with me. That I had a sense of more desire of seeing the Lord face to face. I'm not saying every day, every minute I felt that way, but I remember just thinking, that would be wonderful if Jesus came back before I got married. I'm just fine that he's waiting. He has waited. That's up to him. But, and this is true of the person you would marry. You want someone who loves God more than they love you, who wouldn't compromise their love for God to please you. And you want to be in that position as well. What God says, what God wants is the most important thing. Now, the next principle is that it's something I was told by my mentor when I was about 18, 19 years old, and I've thought about it a lot. He made the statement, you don't have to be in love to have a successful marriage. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be in love, but he made the statement that if you took two very godly people who had the same beliefs and values, and they got married hardly knowing each other, if they really had a biblical commitment to what marriage is, the roles of marriage and love for the Lord, they could do just fine. They could have a successful marriage. And two people, by the way, on the other hand, two people who feel desperately in love and are singing songs to each other and their hearts are going pitter-patter, If they don't share those more important things in common, that relationship will probably burn out. And you actually read sometimes in missionary stories where people who, our culture is, well, you've got to know somebody for years, and you've got to be, courting for years and engaged for many months or a year, and have this very thorough knowledge. Through history, most Christians who got married hardly knew each other compared to that, to now. Now, what they did know is the character of the person they were marrying. What they did know is that person was in the community with them and shared the values and beliefs and were known by others. But it's just, again, I'm not suggesting this, but our system of falling in love and following your feelings has actually not been very successful. It's resulted in a 45% divorce rate and a higher rate of other problems. There's more to choosing a wife or a husband than feeling Twitter-pated. And so, again, you can take it or leave it, but this statement, again, you look in the Bible that, when Isaac got married and, he didn't know Rebekah very well, and yet they were glad together, but they had the same idea of what they were doing. Other examples through history. Other biblical truths, I think, that are illustrated in this passage. By the way, one time a person I was counseling had shown interest in a young lady. He did not, then he became uninterested. She actually did show up on his doorstep. Anyway, not saying that's a methodology to repeat. Anyway, important points. This one has already been implied. Our romantic interests need to be subordinated to our love for God. In a world that makes romance or sex the most important thing, and the saddest part would be where sometimes professing Christians wind up dating or even marrying an unbeliever because they're following their passions and their feelings, which can often be deceitful, rather than pleasing the Lord. And the whole thing is, this is where idolatry can come in, is that you may see a person you really would love to marry. It's not, you can't help but to have those thoughts and desires, but they need to be subordinated to your love for God, because it may not be God's plan. This person may not reciprocate, it may not work out. And one aspect of it, I'm not going to try to sing to you, but there's a Garth Brooks song that doesn't reflect his life, but does have theological truth. It's "Thank God for Unanswered Prayers." And he talks about showing up at a homecoming game and seeing the girl he thought he wanted to marry when he was in high school. And now he sees his wife, and he thanks God for unanswered prayers. And I can say, I thank God that when I thought I wanted to marry another person, that God did not answer that. I think if I'd have married her, we'd have killed each other. Both believers, but too similar. And so it's a matter of trusting God. My friend, remember I told about Savannah and, kind of the mystical almost thing where, talking to his heart was broken several months earlier by the person he thought he wanted to marry, but now he sees how God has provided differently. But it takes faith to wait for that. It can be tempting to run ahead of God. Now, I'm not saying God's going to give you supernatural guidance to tell you this one or that one, but I think running ahead would mean not marrying someone unsuitable. And then another aspect is our approach to love and marriage must consider and respect the interests of others ahead of our own. And I really want to focus on Boaz here, that how he handles the situation where he respects the rights of others in his romantic options. Why doesn't Boaz marry Ruth as immediately as possible? Because somebody else might have a right to marry her instead. And so he defers, he restrains himself. And here's how I want to make the application. Again, some of these things my mentor told me is that if you're out with a girl or a guy on a date or courtship or pre-courtship or whatever label you want to give it, keep in mind that someday this person may be another man's wife. And if someday you were in the same church with her and her husband, you wouldn't want to do anything you were ashamed of. And tonight, some guy may be out with the woman you're going to marry someday, and you hope that the way he acts will be in a way that would not harm your marriage in the future, that he would respect. And I mentioned earlier in 1 Corinthians 7 that the husband's body and his sexuality belongs to his wife. She has authority over that. He has authority over her body, her sexuality. Your sexuality belongs first to God. Your body belongs to God. But then secondarily, it belongs to your spouse. It belongs to your future spouse. And so when you're with someone who's not yet your spouse, even if you think they may be your spouse, they might not be your spouse. And so like Boaz respected the rights of this other man, we should respect the right of whoever may marry our spouse. Another principle would be choose your spouse based upon what really matters biblically. What does Ruth look like? What did she look like? How about the woman in Proverbs 31? What did she look like? We don't know. Actually, both of them had strong arms. Ruth is carrying probably an 80-pound sack of grain back to Naomi in this chapter. She gleaned in chapter 2. So the woman in Proverbs has some physical strength and strength of character. But what attracts them to each other? And this is where charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, a woman who fears the Lord. That's what we're looking for. And likewise with men, is that outward beauty is changeable and may fade. But what does Boaz say? That everyone in the city knows that you are a woman of excellence. And the language used of Boaz in chapter 2, it's not coming from the lips of Ruth, but it calls him like a mighty man, that kind of language. Is that, and Boaz stands out, as he comes to the field. May the Lord bless you, he says to the workers. And you have people who are godly. Commitment based upon character is a much better foundation for a lasting marriage than mere physical attraction. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be physically attracted. Quite frankly, it wouldn't be fair to the person you're marrying if you're disgusted by them. You're saying, well, I don't really feel like kissing you once we're married, but I'll have to. But boy, you have sterling character. You have a great personality. But again, it's easy to feel attracted to somebody for their personality and their physical attractiveness. But, this shows Boaz's character in terms of, and even he says of Ruth, you didn't go after the young men. She came to him because of who he is. And then also in verse 11, he says, all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. This is also, I think, something is like, and I guess I would ask you the question, how do you get that kind of reputation? How do you become a person that the people in your church or your school, your neighborhood say, this is a fine woman, this is a fine man? And it wasn't by making effort to find a boyfriend or girlfriend. Ruth demonstrated her excellence because she became a worshiper of God and because she wonderfully fulfilled a family responsibility at some sacrifice and effort on her own part. And she continued to honor her mother-in-law. I mean, we don't know everything about everything she did. Same thing with Boaz. He's a man who is generous, who follows the law, who respects the rights of others. And so it's back what I've said, you want to become the bait that will catch the fish. That you want to become the kind of person that the person you would want to marry. And that's not through pursuing romance primarily. It's by pursuing growth and maturity and character in your own life. And then it's not wrong to take initiative to find a spouse. I've already told the story of the girl who went and visited the church where the assistant pastor, single assistant pastor was, and they're married now with a child. Naomi and Ruth took action in the book of Genesis when Isaac needed a bride. Abraham, took initiative. Divine providence does not preclude human activity. There's some things that sound really spiritual, like, well, just wait on the Lord. It's true you should wait on the Lord, but that doesn't mean you can't also do things. I've given a couple of examples already, but we had a case one time where there was a missionary who had daughters who, he's in Africa, and he has daughters who are reaching marriageable age, and he wrote to the churches supporting him, and again says, my daughters are becoming of this age, and there's nobody around here, and I would be interested if you have outstanding young men in your church who might be interested in meeting someone like my daughters. These things can be good. I've already given some of the dangers of internet and online. I think you have to do a lot of investigation. But that also would be, he said, you have an excellent reputation. What kind of reputation does this person have? You talk to their pastor, or have somebody talk to the pastor, your dad, your pastor. And then, other principle, God's will must be accomplished in God's way and in God's time. I think Boaz really wanted to marry Ruth. I think Ruth really wanted to marry Boaz. They had to wait one more chapter, a very long day. And you may really want to be married, but you have to wait. And again, there's both initiative and waiting. It's okay to take initiative, to be around prospective people, to make yourself known. Actually, there was a story I meant to tell earlier, but it'll fit now. On February the 13th, 1977, when Caroline and I were already in a courting relationship, and we were having a conversation about marriage, Caroline said to me, well, you know what I would say if you asked me. What is a gentleman to do? I did. Actually, I'll make a comment about engagement now. It was a while before I actually was able to get her an engagement ring because we were still out through college. Our parents said we should finish college first. We honored that request. They also threatened not to keep paying for college if we got married. I think they were bluffing, but so it was more than a year later, maybe 2 years later, before I actually put that ring on her finger. Nowadays, I'm kind of amused. I counsel couples where they've already agreed to marry each other, but like they're choreographing an engagement with 2 camera angles and multiple takes if necessary, so they can put it on, on a reel on social media. My engagement, that it has. So, as far as we were concerned, we were engaged at that point. Anyway, but waiting upon the Lord, and we'll talk some about concerns and dangers and how to pick. And then positively, that we can hope in God that He will provide a spouse. And my statement would be, if God can provide a husband for Ruth the Moabitess in the days of the judges, He can provide one for you. The Moabites normally were to be excluded from the people of Israel, yet she was brought in under the wings of the Lord. She had, another aspect, by the way, she had been barren. She'd been married for a while and not been able to have children. She's not this great prospect. And how many Boazes do you think there were hanging around in the days of the judges? I don't think many at all. But God was able to provide, and it's good to pray. Pray that even when the people you're interested in don't show interest in you, even when the situation seems hopeless. Naomi was hopeless in chapter 1. God is able to provide, and we plead with Him, we pray to Him that he would provide. Pray that God would be preparing someone for you and you for them. But then be patient. And I want to come back to, again, the most important thing we need in life is not romance, it is redemption. Our great need is not for barley in chapter 2 or marriage in chapter 3 or even children in chapter 4. The book is pointing, again, the last word being David. Israel needed a redeemer. The world needs a redeemer. This is a picture of how God brings redemption to us. And we never want to lose sight of that as the big thing. Now, I've got more time. So I'm just going to keep going a little bit more because I don't want to waste my time. I'm not going to go over. Moving back to the process of things, we talked about the fact that in our situation, in our culture, though families may somewhat differ, most of you will find a spouse through some kind of process of intentional dating or courtship, that in the course of that process, you may have multiple times where one or both of you decide this isn't for me. One of the most difficult things, which again, this is now not in the book of Ruth, one of the hard things that people often deal with is, and you'll hear it from both sides, where you'll have a gal who's been intentionally dating or courting with a guy for quite a while. In her mind, it's actually what Caroline said, well, when he asks me, I'll be saying yes, but why isn't he asking? Fish or cut bait, some might say. And those can be difficult. I've also run into situations where the gentleman is sure, and the lady's saying, well, I don't want to cut off this relationship. I'm not saying I'm sure I don't want to marry you, but I'm not sure yet that I do want to marry you. And this can be stressful. This can be difficult. And you have choices to make. Sometimes, I was talking to someone recently that my advice is tell her that you think she's worth waiting for and you're going to give it some more time and you want to try to win her, by leading the relationship in a godly way. But there are also times, you talk to a young lady, and actually in Deepak Reju's book, She's Got the Wrong Guy, one of the categories of wrong guy is the guy who won't commit. And some people want a girlfriend or a boyfriend and they're not looking to marriage. And one of the painful things you may have to do is indicate if this relationship is not going to move forward, then we probably need to sever the relationship. Part of the reason, quite frankly, is if you're looking for a spouse and this person doesn't look likely, you need to get yourself back on the market. Because everybody's going to stay away while you're in that relationship. It also means the necessity to be honest. One of the hard things we watched one time is there was a couple that were courting seriously, and he was from the UK, actually, and his parents were all excited, and they flew over to meet her. And she actually confided in Caroline that she had decided to break the relationship off, but that she wasn't going to do it until the parents were gone. So they spent like a week with the parents, and the mom had actually brought like the grandmother's wedding ring or something. And so then when the parents finally went back to the UK, then she said she broke up with the guy, and she didn't have to marry him. Her father thinks she made a big mistake, but she didn't have to marry him. But part of loving your neighbor as yourself, part of the golden rule would be, if this person knows it's not going to work, then it's better to be told, even though it would be painful. I've seen people like, oh, I don't want to hurt him, I don't want to hurt her. Well, if you've reached that point, that's where you have to trust God that someone else will come, we hope, and we can trust the Lord that the Lord will take care of everybody involved. Again, you want to consciously be thinking through the relationship. I don't want to do something. I will regret once I'm married because I did something I shouldn't have done. I want to avoid hurting this other person. And yes, I want to avoid getting hurt myself. I've already mentioned and could expand upon the fact I'm going to talk about with engagement as well, is that physical touch clouds thinking, creates a bond, creates temptation. I can't say from the Bible you can't hold someone's hand when you're in a courtship type situation. I can say there's a lot of risk. This is also something that, kind of in the honesty of these relationships, different people have different backgrounds and different expectations. And I think it could be wise early on when you're saying we're not just friends, we're thinking of something more serious, to talk about where those boundaries are going to be. I would also encourage seeking accountability with either parents and or a godly older couple, because those boundaries can be hard to keep. General boundary would be don't put yourself in a position where something really terrible could happen because nobody's around. Many people who thought themselves to be committed to purity have found themselves under the influence of hormones and thrilled feelings. And even Hebrews 3:13 says, encourage each other daily as long as it is called today, lest you be caught by the deceitfulness of sin. In a romantic relationship, when you have these feelings, sin can deceive you into doing something that when you wind up married to somebody else, you will regret. And I will even say, even if you marry this person, you'll regret having done some things you shouldn't have done yet. Which gets me to engagement. My understanding is the purpose of an engagement is to get ready to marry. An engagement is a promise, a mutually made promise to marry. Again, different. I can't say from the Bible how long an engagement could be. Since Paul says it's better to marry than to burn, and since Genesis says it's not good to be alone, it seems to me, generally speaking, if you know who you want to marry and you're both certain you should marry each other, you're both certain you both have excellent character, shared common values, why wait any longer than necessary? Temptation may come. Loneliness may be an issue. And, some people, I've already mentioned, like, oh no, we've got to save $40,000 for the typical wedding, and we've got to, have everything all settled with house and everything. I mean, there's a certain amount of financial responsibility, but you can get married a lot cheaper than that. We've had weddings in our church where, the women made food and we bought a cake and they're just as married as anybody else. I've also seen weddings where 6 figures were spent and they didn't last. Girl came in on a carriage pulled by white horses. The magic of that did not make the marriage last. It was very sad. So we strongly recommend pre-marriage or pre-engagement counseling. I think in my last session tomorrow morning, rather than rushing through it now, I want to spend some time on when are you ready to be engaged, and a little bit more on how do you pick the person to court or to be engaged with. I'm not going to rush that. But I think, generally speaking, I think pre-marriage counseling is very valuable to find a pastor. I also think if you can, get a couple to counsel you, not just an elder or a pastor. Carolyn and I have been doing pre-marriage counseling and also pre-engagement counseling together almost from the beginning of our marriage. We found it really good for our marriage. It's delightful to talk about marriage with another couple. We have certain things we go through with people. It also provides some accountability. Another question, I don't know. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands if people here are engaged or expect to be engaged or think they're engaged. Your parents may not know. I'm not sure mine did. But one of the other issues that comes up is what is the place of physical affection during engagement? I think this is a place where Satan can really tempt people. courtship some, but I think engagement in some ways can be more so, because you can rationalize, well, we're going to get married anyway. But the problem will be that you're not married. The covenant hasn't been made. You know, the two become one flesh after making the covenant, being joined in covenant in marriage. And so even if later you marry that person, it was still fornication. But again, the rationale will be, well, what does it matter? You know, now we're married anyway. But by the way, one problem is that often when a couple has been in courtship, too physical with each other, they feel bounded to one another, and even if there are plenty of reasons they shouldn't get married because of character or other problems, because that bond has been created, and the girl thinks, well, boy, I've done this with this guy, nobody else is going to want to marry me anyway, so I better keep him. God's way always works better. He didn't make these rules to mess up your marriage or your life. He made these rules so you could enjoy His goodness and His blessing in the best possible way. And so I think to be very careful. We've had to do counseling quite a few times with couples who were sexually involved during engagement, married each other, and once marriage began, they began to have some pretty significant sexual problems. I think often those problems were due to unconfessed sin and guilt. And part of the process we had to go through would be to seek forgiveness from God and from each other for what you did when you shouldn't have done so. Another downside of it is that you want to be able to trust your spouse that if ever during your marriage sexual temptation comes, that they have the character and the integrity to fight it. Sexual temptation will come, and part of the way you prove that would be, we're engaged, we're going to be married, my body is drawn to yours, I'm yearning for this, but you're saying, I'm not going to do this. I'll tell a story on myself. It was just a few days, a week or two before we were married. We'd already purchased a house. We were not living together in the house, of course, but we were fixing up the house. We were in the house alone, and I was becoming a bit too frisky. And Caroline kind of pushed me back and just said, just wait 10 days. And she didn't do it in a way, it's like, you know, it was just, but it was just like, but I mean, I respect the fact that you're saying, I want to keep you from crossing lines. I had no intention of crossing lots of lines. I would have liked to have crossed a few. But I respect her for helping me. And when you're in these situations, you have to help each other when you're engaged. Sometimes one of you will be struggling more than the other. So I think establishing specific, this is where, and I'm talking about engagement again, but even in courtship, I think the boundaries even need to be tighter. You need to be very careful. I'll give you, as I'm running out of time for this one, when we meet with couples who are very serious or engaged, we ask them, well, what are your boundaries? What are your limits? And oftentimes they're good, and then we'll keep them accountable for that. But I'm going to give you some of what we will talk about when people want suggestions or if I don't think theirs are good enough. Just a few things. One would be, don't be in a situation where something really bad could happen and you wouldn't get caught. That doesn't mean you can't be alone in a room, but you're alone in a room where somebody else might walk in. To be alone, you know, you're thinking you're in her apartment, or she's in your apartment, and I've had guys who, oh well, you know, I'm glad you behaved, but I just think that's a tempting situation. So be careful. Another would be that if what you're doing is making your body yearn for and even physically ready to have sex, you've started to have sex. And if you're sensing your body becoming aroused as a man or a woman, you realize this is what God has designed to prepare a husband and wife to have sex. We ought not to be doing that till we're married. Not to mention the fact that as your body is getting prepared to have sex, stopping is becoming more difficult because you've begun something. And so just to be very careful, I guess I'll give you a third, would be affection while you're engaged, maybe momentary, but it's not an activity until you're married. Does that make sense? I'll be concrete. That I can't draw. A lot of people say we're never going to kiss until we're married. Great idea. I'm all for that. Don't ask me what I did, but I didn't know all this wisdom back then. Some people, the idea of holding hands, you're sitting on the couch and your arms around the back. I can't, giving a hug, hello, goodbye. I can't define from the Bible exactly what would be appropriate in an engagement period. But I can tell you that, like, when I was engaged to Caroline, I would want to know, well, what am I allowed to do? And I want to do as much of it as I can. If you tell me, tie my hands behind my back and I can touch or kiss, her face, I'd probably want to do that as long as you'd let me, but it's not time for making it an activity. That's really a weird place I'm about to end. I got to find some other place to go. I still think my point is correct, that affection, physical affection, is an activity for marriage. It's not an activity for you before you're married. I will even end on a sadder note. Can an engagement be broken? And I would say that an engagement is a promise to marry, and that it shouldn't be broken lightly. Sometimes people get engaged, they go through conflict and difficulties. I think sometimes we could be fearful. I think making that promise to marry is something that you try to work it through, generally speaking. There can be something so heinous or bad that comes out the other person's character. I think you're free to do that. Joseph, when he thought Mary had misbehaved, was going to break their betrothal situation. But as seriously as we should take it, and I've got the example in 1 Samuel 25 I may have used with some of you already, is that when David had made a vow to kill all of Nabal's people, that was a foolish vow. And when Abigail wisely persuaded him not to do it, he broke his vow. And he made a nasty vow, if you read the Hebrew. But he realized that was a sinful vow. So I think if you recognize this engagement is not pleasing to God, I think there can be a place to break it off. But it's not to be done lightly. So, I hope you'll understand from Ruth some of those principles of doing God's work in God's way in God's time, that you can take initiative in an appropriate way, that character is what matters most, to respect the rights of others, the person you or she one day may marry instead of each other, and then just trusting God that if He can provide a Boaz for Ruth, He is able for you to provide in His time and His way. Let me pray. Again, Father in heaven, I pray for these young people. I thank you for their attention. I thank you they can have a wonderful time together, like Boaz feasting. And I pray, Lord, that you would help them to avoid the sins, to avoid the bad decisions sometimes people make, and that you would, in the right time and the right way, lead those who are to be married into joyous marriages which beautifully reflect the love of Christ and His church. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Stand with me. Psalm 134. We learned a little bit yesterday. Now we're going to do it as a round. As Nathaniel come up, when we get ready to do it as a round, it'll be this group will be group one.